Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Stu and the Nun, episode 380. Stu has the night off. He's doing a little bit of traveling, so you're stuck with my ugly mug. And if you tune in on Tuesdays, you will recognize my guest opposite me here, Rudy Denke. So introduce yourself, Rudy.
Hi, my name is Rudy Denke, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Saturday Morning Western Enterprise Corporations with multiple subordinate companies underneath. And by the way, thank you very much for having me back. This is a topic that I'm very passionate about, and here's why. Veteran suicide is never easy to deal with. It impacts so many more people than just the individual that passes away. But it affects family members, and it affects friends, and it affects people that you served with, and people that you chewed some of the same dirt with in combat zones. And everybody who's been on active duty either knows somebody or knows of somebody who's been affected by this pandemic. To put this into magnitude, to put this into a magnitude that people understand, we lose 28 veterans a day to suicide. Most of those are older than 50 years old, and there's some common things that we hear from the therapists who, in the cases where they did have a therapist, there were common denominators: chronic depression, hopelessness, despair. Sometimes it's money problems. Sometimes it's relationship problems. Sometimes, and one of the stories that I'm going to relate to you was a result of a terminal illness. And let's start with that one, with your permission, sir.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. So I had a friend. He was a little bit older than I am. In fact, he was in the middle part of his career, middle to 3/4 through his career, when I met the man. And I considered him a friend. And I was at his house, and I knew his children and watched his children grow up. Unfortunately, he was a chain smoker, and he smoked Pall Malls without a filter on him. He went into a hospital, the emergency room, on a Friday afternoon because he was having some chest pains, and they ran a whole battery of tests with him because his anatomical readings just weren't right. What they concluded with at the end of the night is that he had stage 4 lung cancer, and they only gave him anywhere from days to months to live. He made it through the weekend, and then on Monday morning, he decided that it was going to be way too painful to go through chemotherapy and to not have it be an effective process. And he went and sat on the railroad tracks. And it's terrible. It really is terrible. Part of me understands this particular case, why not wanting to go through chemotherapy, not wanting to be in the hospital for months on end if he made it that long, and having no chance, zero chance of success. Because of the quick turnaround on this, and the very short nature of how much they gave him to live, a lung transplant just wasn't feasible.
Right.
So the doctors said, that they, and I knew this, and I know this because I then, talked to his wife afterwards. I wasn't I didn't have the conversation with the doctors, but it was relayed through his spouse that although the doctor said, the very best case scenario would be 6 months, it was more like 30 days when they expected him to pass away. So part of me understands why it happened, but that doesn't fill the hole that was left in so many people's lives.
No.
And the man was married. He had, adult children by this point in time, and grandchildren, and just it affected so many more people than the immediate victim. And there's just the way it ended didn't allow anybody closure in the matter, and I think that it left a bigger hole because of the way it happened, and the fact that people didn't have a chance to prepare for what was going to come.
Sure.
To be able to do this, and I know that his wife had to go to grief counseling and everything else to be able to help her pass the hump, which, by the way, is one of the things that we're doing with this process. So I've told you now at least one story, and we'll get to the second one in a minute. Why this is, I'm so very passionate about this issue. But one of the organizations that we paired with to be able to do this is the Mothers of Veteran Suicide, which is a global nonprofit organization. They provide 5 different areas of support for people who are all messed up on the inside. The first is they provide, they have a full-blown operation. It's called Operation Stay. What Operation Stay does is it allows people to recognize what the warning indicators are and get help before the crisis actually happens.
Sure.
So, and it's a completely confidential system. It's not broadcast to the world. I know that, especially the guys that went to work for like the defense contracting industry or back into the government, they're worried about their clearances and the impact of having, talking to a therapist could have on their clearances and on their job and on their job stability and everything else. But this is a completely confidential part of the Mothers of Veteran Suicide. And so there's a prevention aspect of it. Recognize the warning signs. Talk to somebody. In addition to that, we also have the National Suicide Hotline, and I believe it's going to be a banner underneath. I saw it. There we go. I saw the banner underneath. And this is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And if you are feeling all messed up inside, or you're feeling that despair, or you feel like you're suffering from chronic depression, then give them a call. And I don't know how you feel, but I'd rather render help to somebody than read about them in an obituary.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the biggest things, and it's very prominent in the veteran community, right? And even when we're active, is the kind of unwillingness to reach out, right? One of the things that we all go through as veterans is, once we get out, we have that kind of separation anxiety for a little bit, right? So we're no longer with our friends every day, but as time goes by, we tend to start fighting our battles by ourselves, right? Even if we're married, even if we, have a spouse, even if we have brothers and sisters, we tend to kind of bottle a lot of that stuff up and just fight it by ourselves, thinking we're going to be able to get through it.
Yeah.
And the thing about these veteran hotlines and stuff like that, this doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. This is just simply to help you reconnect and just speak to somebody. Sometimes even just speaking to somebody helps. As you just said, I would rather have a 3 o'clock call to talk to somebody I don't even know than to read about it the next day in the paper, or on the news or something. So
because of the pervasiveness of the problem, there's also another mechanism that people can use to get immediate help. You can text 988 and text help to this number, and within a matter of minutes, you're going to get a phone call from a therapeutic counselor to be able just to have somebody to talk to. So if you feel like you're at wit's end, and if you feel like there's no hope in the situation, as was the case with another friend of mine who I'll tell you about, and I wish I knew about this function then because this one still hurts today.
Sure.
Mike was a good friend of mine. Mike had a wife and two little girls, and he absolutely adored these little girls. His whole world revolved around being a father with them and doing everything that a father would do with two small girls, and they're young girls. They're 3 and 5 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and Mike, um, for as good as he was to his daughters, he had kind of a challenging relationship with his wife. His wife decided that there was no future with it. She took the little girls and left.
Mm.
And no contact information, no forwarding address, no way for a guy whatsoever to be able to continue to be a part of his daughter's lives. Unfortunately, he went into a spin cycle. And
Mm.
the spin cycle, he started drinking, and he started drinking early in the morning. Um, I was traveling at the time. I was in the States, but I was traveling at the time. I got a phone call about 9:30 in the morning, and it was drinking and crying and a full breakdown. And no matter what I could do, I couldn't talk him down off the cliff. And I wish I knew that the 988 text message existed then, because I would have done it on his behalf. I would
Right.
have called and said, "Hey, listen, give this guy a call. He really needs to talk to somebody." The day didn't get any better. No contact with his wife, no contact with his daughters. Continued drinking, and he continued spiraling. By about 8 o'clock at night, he stuck a rifle in his mouth and pulled the trigger.
Mm.
I talked to him that day. I talked to him that day,
Yeah.
and it's hard.
Yeah.
He's a friend. This is a guy that I went hunting with, a guy that I went fishing with. We went camping together. I knew his little girls. In fact, when he'd go out or when he was trying with his wife and, would try and go out on a dinner date or anything like that, I was the one to watch kids.
Right.
So I was a part of their lives. And um, that's one of those areas, that's one of the warning signs too, where relationship problems, money problems, job satisfaction are all things that can bring people to that edge. And that's why it's so very important that you can talk to somebody to help you bring you down off the ledge. And sometimes a friend can't do it, no matter how
Sure.
close that friend is. I wish I had a PhD in psychology, but I don't. The best thing I can do is be a good friend.
Yeah.
But I
Well,
wish,
sometimes it's beneficial to talk to somebody you don't know as well, right? So you can. Some people feel a little bit more open to speak to somebody. Like, you and I friends. I'm not going to tell you anything that I think may embarrass me, right? But I can tell a stranger those types of things, and so sometimes that's very helpful to get those things out. So
I agree. Again, I wish I knew that then,
yeah,
and a way to be able to get him to talk to somebody that wasn't in his immediate circle, and to bring a fresh perspective to things, and talk about the emotions that brought him to the cliff, and how to manage those emotions so that they don't continue in that spin cycle.
sure. Well, we just spent as a country 2 decades at war, right?
We did.
And even before that, look at the Vietnam era veterans and everything that they went through, which a good portion of those are still alive, right? We're getting down to where there's not very many World War II veterans left,
Yeah.
if any. There's Korea, but then you get into Vietnam, and where I'm going with this is look how long it has taken to get certain things like Ancient Orange, you know, so that those guys can get help. And
Yeah.
think about the first Gulf War and all the burn pits and the Camp Lejeune water and how long it takes. You said your friend was a smoker, but there is a lot of other things that the military goes through that can
Sure.
cause these problems and cause
Sure.
these medical conditions,
Yeah.
and it also causes some of the things that affect us mentally, right? The human body and the human mind is not meant to see some of the things that are seen in combat, right?
That's
They,
true.
they just can't. You can't train up enough for those types of things, and you have to have some sort of outlet to take care of that.
Sure.
So one of the things that, and Troy talks about this all the time, that the military does a fantastic job of teaching soldiers how to kill and preparing them for war, but they don't do a very good job of talking them back down off the cliff. Right. So
That's
after the
right.
fact, they don't. So one of the things that I've always been engaged in, and you are too, is a lot of these veterans groups where I volunteer, to give my name, my number, and again, I would rather have a call at 3 o'clock in the morning with somebody I don't know than to read about it the next day. So,
I feel the same way. And at the end of this presentation, I'm going to offer the same thing.
right,
If you are all fuckered up on the inside, and if you need somebody to talk to, I'll give you my business telephone, which is on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
right,
And at the end of this, I will avail that information as part of this veteran support network. I do think there's one other thing that really is an exacerbating set of circumstances with this. Because we spent so much time in combat zones, there's a large segment of our population, of our veteran population, that also have PTSD.
sure,
And what that does is that creates a jaundiced lens to be able to try and look at circumstances and events and take them and analyze them for what they are without an emotional response for it. So
mhm,
PTSD, one of the most common symptoms of PTSD is anger that spirals, takes on a life of its own, right? And if you're that angry at the world and then something happens, it makes it extraordinarily difficult to be able to walk back off that cliff, because there's no way, there's no physical capability to control the anger piece of it, and then you have these other things, and it feels like you're being attacked from every direction, from every side, and there's just no relief from it.
yeah,
And so, because we did spend so much time in the combat zones, and because there are so many combat veterans, and a lot of them, and a lot of us have seen some pretty ugly things in the world, and that PTSD piece of it is something the services are coming to grips with it now, and the Veterans Administration and everybody else is becoming more proactive in diagnosing PTSD and giving people problems. But some of the solutions that they offer don't help either.
sure,
And I'll tell you that there's a trend right now where people want to get a medical marijuana card to be able to deal with PTSD. And the problem is you're introducing a chemical into your body, which is a depressant.
hmm,
And if you're already depressed, or if you're clinically depressed and you add a depressant on top of that, that's one of those things that can cause you to spiral as well. If it helps you, hey, I'm happy with about that. But if you have any inclination of self-harm, and you're mixing drugs or alcohol with that inclination, then it
sure,
becomes a double whammy, and makes it really, 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 really hard to come down
right,
if you get that spun up.
yeah. Well, one of the things with PTS is the stigma, right? So we talked briefly about how veterans like to handle things themselves. Well, the other part of that is the stigma that comes along with PTSD, right?
It is.
Post traumatic stress disorder, right? And they hear the word disorder and they think, well, I'm broken, right? I'm mentally incapable. The other thing, and I've seen this countless times, where those who have PTSD don't want to get diagnosed with it because they're afraid that they're going to lose like their Second Amendment rights, right?
That's right.
So they're afraid that that's
Right.
going to get taken away from them, or like it was tried under one of the previous administrations, they tried to, if you filed for that, they tried to take away and say that you weren't mentally capable of even handling your finances, right? And so then they use that as an avenue to attack you. I'm a very analytical thinker. I'm an IT guy by trade, and I like to break things down into small chunks. But
Hmm.
one of the problems I've always had with veteran suicide is there's no one cause, right?
Yeah.
There is multiple things that are at work here, whether it's PTSD, whether it's TBI, whether it's financial, whether
Yeah.
it's, your spouse, whether it's kids, or
Yeah.
whether maybe you had something that was in there before, maybe some childhood trauma that came out later. And
That's right.
so there's a lot of different things that can cause these results, right? And
That's
one of
right.
the problems I see across a lot of these organizations and across a lot of the awareness is we tend to look at the the symptom rather than the cause, right?
Yeah.
So suicide is simply the result. It's not the cause.
That's right.
We need to go back a step and go back a step even further than that and try to get to the root cause and stop it from happening in the first place.
That's why I'm an advocate of the Mothers of Veteran Suicide, because they do have the prevention programs in place, and they offer at least a service where if somebody is exhibiting dangerous warning signs, where you can get them help.
Right.
Now, they do offer some other things, and I'm a big supporter of some of their other programs as well. So they offer grief counseling for the kids and for the spouses. So when something does happen, um, especially that first year. So after somebody passes away, the kids don't have a mother or father anymore. They're trying to adjust. They're trying to make it through school, and this is one of those times where the sphere of people who are impacted by this is so much bigger than just the individual, right? But
Right.
Mothers of Veteran Suicide, they do the grief counseling, they do grief retreats, and they provide some family support through their family funds. Where the first year when the kids go to school after they lose their mom and dad, they get a book bag full of school supplies, and they get a birthday card or a small gift on their birthday and something at Christmas, just to be able to help them through the process, so
Sure.
that when we talk about spiraling and the sphere of influences, this second ring of influence can really be impacted, and this is something that can impact them for the rest of their lives, and frankly, it can mess them up too.
Yeah.
So that's one of the other services that Mothers of Veteran Suicide provide is the grief counseling and the grief retreats and the family funds to be able to help those kids and the spouses transition through that program. The
Mhm.
next one, and I got to look at the brochure for a minute because I think I forgot one. So let me check and see. Oh, um, so one of the things that happens with the support network is there is some therapeutic value in meeting with other people who are in your same circumstances. So what Mothers of Veteran Suicide does is, when the spouses and when the children, when this happens, they often kind of lose their goals. They're just kind of aimless. They don't know what to do. And so through the volunteering program, it gives them purpose to be able to have a legitimate and tangible goal to be able to help other people who are in the same sort of circumstances that you may be in, or that you may have lived through. And so that's another really big aspect of this is, and it's a continuing part of the therapeutic process, is to be able to say, listen, here's something to help you in the near term until things level out, where you can help other people that may have been in your same set of circumstances.
Right.
They are a nationwide nonprofit organization. You can go directly to their website and help support this effort. Um, you can also contact me, and I can get the donations to the organization. But I think the 5 stages that they represent is really something that it can help. There's not,
Sure.
there's so many things and there's so many disjointed things, but it's rare to find one organization that has all 5 programs in place and they're all 5 functional programs.
Right.
So it's not a paper tiger. These are actual, real functioning programs.
Yeah, well, even beyond the immediate family, right? I mean, you just gave us two stories of friends of yours, right? One of the things that we build bonds with, our brothers and sisters, because we've gone through things that very little of the population have gone through, right? You know, that would veterans make up something like 1% of the population, or less than 10, something like that.
Yep.
So you've got another 90 90+% of the U.S. population that has never been through even something as simple as boot camp, right?
Right.
They've never been through that. So we build these bonds with our brothers and sisters, and when you lose them, that helps, that can cause, the thing to domino and cascade into others as
It
well.
can.
So
And I think most people are equipped to deal with one situation when they're attacked by one situation.
mhm,
It's when multiple situations or multiple sets of circumstances attack you all at once
sure.
that I think cause people to take that next step toward the edge. So
Mhm,
one thing can manage, even if you have PTSD, if there's one issue that comes up, then you can generally manage that. It's that when 3 or 4 or 5 things happen all at once, and there just doesn't seem to be any relief from it. Is I
right.
think the things that causes people to take those additional steps towards a cliff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the great things about, the text message and the 1-800 number is, we've all had to deal with the VA, right? I mean, you call the VA and you may get an appointment 6 months from now, right? And unfortunately, that has caused some suicides, right? We've
Yeah, it
seen in the
has.
past where veterans have walked into VA offices and
Yep.
committed suicide in the offices. So
Hmm.
these numbers are immediate, right? So that text
They are.
message and that phone number, someone's going to answer right then.
They are.
So, everybody needs to make sure, not just the veteran themselves, but the family members, the other veterans. Maybe you have friends with PTSD, maybe you have friends with TBI, maybe you have friends who are going through a couple of things, whether it's, spouse problems, whether it's, I've seen, it's unfortunate. I've had friends, non-veterans, who have lost a child, and then later they ended up committing suicide themselves,
Yeah.
you know. So there's all kinds of things that can affect that, and getting help, simply by dialing a phone number, and this is going to sound kind of, funny, but you don't even have to be sober when you call, right? I mean, if you
No,
if you've had a few drinks, call it anyway. They
that's
will
right.
talk to you. They will talk to you.
They will.
Yeah.
They will, and they'll stay on the phone for as long as it takes to be able to
Yeah.
talk to you and try and help at least take a step backwards and think about things less logically and more, or less emotionally and more logically. So
True.
they will stay on the phone for you for as long as it takes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I kind of fear it's not gonna get a lot better. I almost have a fear that it's gonna get a little bit worse. We each generation has their own set of problems, right? And we just came out of a pandemic where a large portion of our children, were locked away,
Yep.
at home for months and months at a time. They didn't
Hmm.
have that social outlet that they would have had otherwise.
Yep.
And then these are going to grow up and to be adults, and some of them are going to join the military,
Yep.
and some of that's going to carry over and may cause some problems down the line. Maybe it won't. I hope I'm wrong, but that's the unfortunate thing that I see coming.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that as these kids come to maturity, they may bring some issues with them into adulthood that they may need to talk to somebody as well.
Sure. Yeah.
So I
Well,
know that we flashed the telephone number and the 988 on the bottom of the screen during this, but on one of
mhm,
the things I also would like to do is I would like to show you this. And so you can take a screenshot of it if you have the capability to do that, but even the QR codes and the telephone number and the address for contacting mothers of veteran suicide.
okay. Yeah, it's I know for some it seems like it's the easier or the lesser of two evils,
Yeah,
but it really does cascade into a lot of other areas. It's not just, your spouse, it's not just your children, it's your friends, it's your
it is.
mother, your father, your brother, your sister, even your brothers in arms. It really can cascade into a very bad problem.
It can. There is a venue, and I don't do this very often, but I'm gonna to do it in this case. If you want to see an illustration of how this affects other people, there's a young man that just published a song, and I'm going to pull up his name right now and what the song is. The song talks about is somebody that has committed is somebody that's committed suicide, and all the people are gathering around to attend the funeral. And you see in this song and in the video presentation of it just how many people were affected. That the individual that committed suicide probably had no idea that all of these people were going to be affected. So it was mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and people that you went to school with. So the young man that sings the song, his name is, got to get my glasses. Hold on a minute. Blaine Larson. It's BLAINE LARSEN. And the song is called How Do You Get That Lonely? And it talks about a little bit, how do you get to the state where you just feel that there's no help available and no help for you, specifically for you. And the artist does a pretty good job in doing this and showing the first tier effects, the second tier effects, and the third tier effects through his video.
Right.
I had actually used this to as a background song for the events coming up on the 4th of October, to be able to not so much to tug at people's heartstrings, but rather just this is how many people are affected.
Right.
So it's not just the individual that unfortunately decides to kill themselves. It's all the other people in their social spheres. Guys that you went to boot camp with, guys that you were in combat with,
sure,
guys that you were at their house and had a barbecue with. And there's just some of this just doesn't fade away either. Especially for the ones where you think you could have made a difference.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't fade away. That pain and that emptiness is going to be there for a while.
Right. We had a guest on here. He's actually been a repeat guest. His name is Douglas Torrell. He's an actor, and he does a one-man play, and it kind of goes through, a lot of the things that drive people to suicide. He also has a Netflix series called Landing. I think it's Landing Home. That's about a veteran coming back from combat and dealing with those types of things. It's definitely the play. I've not seen it myself, but I've read a lot of the reviews on it and everything, and everybody comes away from that and just says that is as accurate as it can get. And so
I think, and I would love to see the play, and I hope that he goes through the stages of grief. So just like the individual can spiral up, so can the people that are affected by this as well. And there's an entire grief cycle. You may go through you may go through anger, a period where you're angry, lonely, heartbroken, sad, and the people who are experiencing the grief are also going to have all of these factors that sometimes happen all at once. And that's why the ability to provide family counseling and grief counseling through this process and understand the stages of grief and understand how to effectively manage them where it doesn't affect you like it's affected other people.
Right. I'd mentioned before I participate in a lot of the different veteran groups. One of the things that I do for my regular 9-to-5 job is I'm the veteran resource group lead. And we have a lot of talks with a lot of the other veterans. And one of the things that someone brought up that I think is very important that a lot of veterans don't do is get involved in the VA as soon as you can when you're leaving service. Mm-hmm. Get into the system, because that is the longest pole in the tent to start getting some of the benefits that you've earned, right? And to get some of the help that you deserve, right? So anybody who hasn't contacted the VA and as a veteran, I would suggest they go ahead and get into the system, get that part over with, because that's going to take the longest. And then once you're in the system, then things can start, they can help you a little bit more.
So there's also another venue that's available for transitioning service members, and that's that your exit physical from the service can be as far forward as 6 months before your actual EAS. if you do the coordination beforehand, your exit physical can be the same physical as your entrance physical for the VA.
It's good to know.
It is. So before you even leave active duty, when you're going through your final physical, and when you're going through SEPs, and when you're going through everything else, and the TAPS program, if you have to do that, you can work the Veterans Administration at the same time. So when I retired, my exit physical was already logged with the Veterans Administration, and my first month of retirement, I got a concurrent check from the VA. It took some doing.
Sure.
But you have the capability to do that, and it is well within the regulations for all the Title X services to do just that. And that may be a helpful venue too, especially if you are one of these people that you have PTSD, or you have TBI, or any of the other issues that are already there, and get the VA to acknowledge that these exist, and it can help you. It can facilitate getting the help that you need later on.
Well, transitioning out of the military is hard enough as it is, right?
It is.
Again, you're leaving behind, especially for somebody who did it as long as you did, right? You did 23 years, if I remember correctly. 22 years, yeah.
Yep.
So when you've spent the good portion, and a lot of us, you included, and I, we went in when we were 18, 19, 20, right? That's the time in our lives when our brains are still mush and they're being molded by the military, right?
Yeah.
So that is the biggest influence that will ever happen, to any young individual, right? That there's early 16 to about 25 years of age.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you're the most impressionable. And so when you do that, and then you do, like I said, as long as you did, you're kind of stepping away, and there's that little bit of uncertainty, right? What am I going to do? And so if you can go ahead and get some things knocked out, like you just said, get that VA started, get that knocked out early.
Yep.
That's going to help you with that transition.
It is. That's actually one of the other times where, because there's so much strife in life and so many unknowns at that point in time, the transition can be something that's pretty tough. And if you already have the clinical depression or any of the other issues, the transition period can significantly exacerbate that. Here, let me see if I can put this into perspective. You're on active duty. Most of us aspire to be senior on active duty. Nobody wants to be painting the yellow rocks outside of the first of the 509, airborne training unit, Alpha Company training unit, right? And painting both sides of the rocks, right? You don't want to do that after 20 years in the service. So we all aspire to be senior. And you get to a point, whether you're on the enlisted side, the warrant officer ranks, or the officer ranks, where you get senior enough where you're no longer doing those things. And you have the capability to give instructions. Well, during the transition process, you learn that not everything that you did on active duty translates into your new role. And that can cause a lot of strife. It can cause a lot of consternation in your personal life as you try and figure some of these things out. But the transition period can be pretty tough as well. And for just that reason, you go from being senior to, being a new employee.
Yeah.
And you can no longer bark orders and have an instantaneous response.
Sure.
The civilian community just does not appreciate that very well.
And whether you get out, close to where you were serving, right? I mean, you're originally from Wisconsin, Minnesota.
So born on Camp Pendleton, and then grew up in Minnesota and South Dakota.
And then now you live in Virginia, right?
And now I live in Virginia.
Yeah. So when you got out of the military, you're now, but not even where you grew up, right?
Mm.
So if you do go back home, most of your friends aren't there anymore, right? The friends you grew up with, they're not there anymore. They're off doing their own thing. So now you no longer have that connection. Right. But if you get out where you're serving, you also don't have a connection to the friends that you had when you were in, because within 2 years they're PCSing somewhere else.
Right.
So
that's true. And even the people that are still around, you don't have much in common with them.
Sure.
When you're on active duty, you have a much wider aperture for how you look at the world.
Right.
There are still guys that, I went to high school with, and that's a long time ago, 40 years ago, that are still doing the same silly stuff they did in high school. Yeah. So I went to my 25-year class reunion, and one of the guys, and he was one of the party guys in high school and everything else, like, dude, guess what? We're having a kegger in the cornfield. You're 42 years old. Right. Why are you holding a kegger in the cornfield at this point in time? You can just go right up the street and go to the bar.
Yeah.
And their world is, this big around, right? And you just don't have much in common with them when you do go back.
No.
So that's just kind of a funny tangent to, what we're talking about. But
yeah. Yeah. And, to touch on what you said about the civilian life, right? You can't go in there, kicking and screaming. They don't tend to really like that too much on the civilian side.
No. And there's a transition period for you as well. Especially for those people that were coming from the combat zone. So for Marines, and I'm going to be blunt, the more profane and the more vulgar you are, the more instantaneous response to the order that you're given. That's, again, something else that doesn't translate into the civilian world very well. And so that's not a part of your personality that you can carry forward and expect to be successful with it. If you do try and carry that forward, and I can tell you this as a chief executive officer, you're not going to be around long.
Unless you're going to construction.
Yeah, well, even then, right? Yeah. Even then.
Well, they kind of look at you funny also when you're sitting at your desk eating crayons. So,
well, that's true. 100%. That's right. That's right. And by the way, we can not only eat them, but we can tell you what flavor they are and what vintage they were too.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That transition to the civilian life, I got out long before you did. But one of the things that I remember, and I think they've gotten much better, when I was transitioning out, basically I walked into a room and they said, update your resume, have a nice day. And out the door I went. And I'm like, that's my transition? Really? Update my resume? I've never had a resume in my life. I've spent the last 8 years here. I didn't need a resume. And then now you're telling me I have to go write one. And what am I going to put on it? I can back up that 5-ton,
with a ground guide.
Yeah, with a ground guide.
And by the way, you also have to wear your helmet and your flak jacket while you're doing
I know how to put my PT belt on, properly,
Sure.
Yeah. So there's those. One of the things that I did at one of my previous employers that I thought was fantastic was as a civilian organization, as a civilian company, we partnered with a veterans group that did interviews and helped veterans write their resumes. And we did it from the aspect of the company looking at these resumes, right? And where my role came into this was having the being the veteran, I could talk them into saying, okay, what is your job? Well, your job is this. Okay, well, that job comes with a secret security clearance. You need to make sure you put that on your resume because that is very, very worthwhile in the civilian world. Okay, now you have combat lifesaver. Now you have medical experience. Now you have PT, physical fitness experience. You have all of these things that you can list that you're selling yourself short on because you simply think, well, those were everyday things that everybody did.
Yeah.
But in the civilian world, those types of things, especially the clearance is one of those that people often forget, and that it really stands out because if a company doesn't have to do a background check and you already have a security clearance and it's still active, that's worth a lot of money to you.
So we're talking about the stress of transition and how appropriately tailoring your resume and having a plan when you come out of the service can help alleviate some of those stresses and prevent you from ever getting close to that cliff, right?
Right.
But there are other things that you have to keep in mind, and just some of the things that you did on active duty don't translate. The things that do translate, you can talk about leadership. But one of the things that I would tell you is that even if you are stacked like a Russian field marshal, where your gold jump wings are up on your shoulder seam, right? Not everything on your chest is going to translate to the civilian world.
Sure.
And frankly, most civilians don't care if you've got a Legion of Merit. They just don't care. They don't know what that is, and they don't care.
Right.
What they are going to care about is your leadership capabilities and your ability to be able to manage situations, to be able to task orient and see an idea from conceptualization through production and even the hot wash and the lessons learned on top of that. Sure. These are things that are going to be valuable. But I would caution people against things. I would caution people against having false expectations when you come into the civilian world. So I retired, and I had an immediate job as a senior program manager for the big Silver Abyss at Anacostia. And what I didn't know there was a transition period for me because going from a chief warrant officer to a program manager, there were a lot of things that I had to learn. And there was a lot of things about the civilian world that I didn't know. So I'd have to put together a PMP brief for every one of my programs. Okay. And tell me what your underburn is. Okay. Well, tell me first what underburn is. And so my first 6 months was a learning period, but I was already in a leadership position. And that's a pretty unforgiving position to be in because you have expectations from both the government and the contracting company, and you've got to be able to deal with the Corps and the KO and everybody else. These can all be sources of stress that if you don't manage appropriately can, really mess you up pretty quickly.
Yeah. One of the things that I've always throughout my life that helps me with stress is physical fitness, right? I had a sergeant major when I was in the Army, and he said one of the biggest killers of veterans is they stop.
Yeah.
As soon as they get out, they stop. They no longer, you're running 5 miles a day, 5 days a week. Granted, if you're at Fort Bragg, you're also drinking 5 gallons a day.
You are. That's right.
The night before till 5 a.m.
That's right.
But you're used to going all the time, right? And then you get into the civilian world. It's like I don't have to do PT anymore, right? I don't have to go, run 5 miles, but you really should. You really should stay active.
It helps out with a lot of things. It helps things with things like blood pressure, and it helps things with your diet, and make sure that you don't become a food blister after you do retire. Yeah. Again, one of those sources of stress is you've got to make time to be able to take care of yourself. And if you don't, then, you do become a food blister, and that adds another source of stress on top of your life. Right.
Yeah.
And so you go from being physically active to going, all right, I've got to get up at 4:15 in the morning and commute into Washington, D.C. I've got a 14-hour workday and then a 3-hour commute on top of that. When am I going to find time to PT? Yeah. But that's an excuse. So don't start making excuses about things. Do what you have to do to take care of yourself, because nobody else other than your family is gonna take care of you and see you through this process and help you alleviate some of those stresses that we've talked about.
Yeah. I've always been an advocate of your physical health. Your physical health affects your mental health, and your mental health affects your physical health. Right. If you're already kind of depressed and down and you're not going to want to go to the gym. You're not going to want to go to work. You're not going to want to talk to people. But if you're physically healthy, your body is now going through and producing some of the endorphins and things that you need that's going to help you mentally. And those things are tied together and are very, very important.
Yeah, they are. I agree with you. And if there's any way to help relieve some of the stress so that you don't get to that cliff, then I'm all for it. Physical fitness is an important part of it. Some of your listeners may not like this, but there's also a spiritual health to be able to consider as well. And just whether you believe or not, that's on you. I'm not an evangelist. I'm not a preacher. But a belief in something bigger than mankind can provide a lot of comfort in times of stress.
Well, and that physical health, I mean, doesn't need to be the gym either. I mean, you mentioned hunting, fishing, getting out into the, there's a lot of organizations out there that do, I know one that I know personally, Hunting with Heroes. Yep. It's hunting up in Montana, I believe. And so those types of things are physical. You mentioned the spiritual health. There's churches are always open. They
are. Whether there's also somebody else to talk to.
Sure, and whether it's your denomination, or whether you believe or whether you don't, the majority of the preachers that I've ever met. I'm a Baptist by from when I was born. I grew up as a Baptist, and the preachers that I know, they're not gonna try to. Well, I need you got to come into the church. No, they will sit there and talk to you. They will talk to you and talk you through whatever you need to talk about.
And it doesn't matter if you're a parishioner or not. If you need somebody to talk to, they're available. They don't have an agenda other than, okay, so we told a joke the last time I was on here, so now I'm going to tell a joke again, just to try and lighten the mood a little bit, right? I grew up north, and so far up north, in fact, that, Chicago is, we look down on Chicago and call them Southerners. They're 15 hours south of where my mom and dad live now.
Ooh.
15 hours drive time south of where my mom and
You're
dad
almost
live.
Canadian.
Very close. Before, when they changed the drinking age in Canada was still 18. So you could go across the border and drink in Canada and then come back. But Southern Baptists, they're more than happy to lay hands on you. If need be, they'll make you speak in tongues. And if that's the case, then if that doesn't work, then they'll hold your head underwater until you capitulate.
Sure.
No, I'm being funny. They're not going to do that to you, but they are people that will talk to you, and they're genuinely caring human beings.
Yeah. Like I said, I grew up in a Baptist church. They don't mind if you drink either. So, and some of the Baptist preachers I know cuss as bad as I do. So,
yeah. Me too. So it's just one option that's available, even if you're not somebody that is driven by faith. It's another venue for somebody that you can talk to in those circumstances where you are all messed up and you don't feel like you can talk to anybody else.
Right. Absolutely.
So I told you that as we get closer to the end, and I was just looking to make sure that we stay on time. I told you that, and I told your audience that I'm going to give you my work telephone number, and I'm going to do that, and I'm also going to give you my work email address. And if it's one of those days where you don't want to talk to anybody else, you're more than welcome to give me a call. My name is Rudy Denke. My business telephone number is 540-903-5085. That's going to ring to Saturday Morning Westerns, which is one of the companies that I own. The business email address is Saturday Morning Westerns LLC @gmail.com. Either way, you can get a hold of me if you do find yourselves in one of those circumstances and you need to talk to somebody.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, so is there anything else you want to say?
No, just that for those people that feel that there is no hope, there's always hope. You just have to find the right venue to be able to get there. If it's a phone call to help somebody, or if it's a text message, or if it's calling me, if you're hurting, reach out to somebody, talk to somebody. We started this conversation by saying that I would rather get a phone call at 3:00 in the morning than read an obituary on Monday morning. Yeah. And I mean that. So if you're feeling all fuckered up on the inside, and if you feel like you have no hope, then reach out to somebody and talk to somebody.
The world is a lot better place with you in it than without you. So, and everybody needs to remember that. There's a lot of us out there. I would say look at your local organizations as well.
Yep.
Look at there's VFWs everywhere. You may end up with some crotchety old Marine, Vietnam, era Marine that's in the corner, but I'm sure he'll sit there and listen to you. And
I'll buy you beer probably too.
Yeah, probably buy you a couple of beers.
That's right.
And but yeah, please reach out to somebody. So
thank you again for having me on the show. Do we need? I know that we were on for about an hour and we've been on for about 51 minutes. Is there anything you want to add to this, sir?
No. I just this is a topic that's always been near and dear to me. I've had friends that have committed suicide, both veterans and non-veterans, but it's always been something that I love my brothers and sisters. They're all. I would rather see them. I would rather talk to them. I'd rather hear their stories. One of the reasons why we started that Tuesday series that you were on, right? I want to capture those stories, and I can't do that if you're not here. So,
I agree.
So, absolutely. Well, thank you, Rudy. Thank you for coming back on. Thank you for sharing this information, and we appreciate you.
Absolutely. I had fun, and I hope we can do something in the future and collaborate again.
Yeah, absolutely. Let us know when you get, some more of that stuff off the ground, and we'll bring you back on.
Sounds good to me. I appreciate your help. Thank you.
Thanks, Rudy.
Bye.